Corporal Lexa Vasquez was minding her own business when the 8-foot Krillian decided to make it everyone's problem. The Rimworld Cantina on Zephyr 3 served the kind of clientele that preferred their conversations quiet and their questions unasked. Lexa had picked a corner booth specifically for the privacy, hoping to finish her monthly equipment inventory without interruption. Her plasma rifle needed recalibration, her armor's reactive plating had taken some hits during the last sweep, and Command wanted all gear assessments filed before the next deployment rotation. Unfortunately, War-Thane Grakus had decided today was perfect for some cross-species posturing. "Human warrior," the massive Krillian announced, his forearms spread wide as he approached her table. His purple hide bore the ritual scarification that marked him as a veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, and the bone trinkets woven into his mane clattered with each step. "You carry yourself like one who has seen battle. Tell me, how many enemies have fallen before your weapons?" Lexa didn't look up from her datapad, where she was logging the ammunition expenditure from their last pest control operation. 18,000 rounds of standard ammunition, 46 plasma charges, and 12 microgrenades. Not bad for a 6-hour shift, though Jenkins had complained about running low on explosive ordnance toward the end. "I'm trying to do paperwork," she said, stylus hovering over the entry field for projectile weapon usage statistics. Grakus stepped closer, his hooves ringing against the cantina's deck plating. The other patrons, mostly traders and freight runners with a few off-duty security personnel scattered around, were starting to pay attention. Nothing livened up a slow afternoon like watching someone pick a fight with human military. "I have claimed 432 honorable kills in single combat," the War-Thane declared, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet establishment. "Your kind are known for their persistence in warfare. Surely a warrior of your bearing has an impressive tally to share." Lexa finally looked up, studying the Krillian's expectant expression. In her experience, aliens who asked about kill counts were usually trying to establish some kind of dominance hierarchy. Most species treated combat as a personal achievement system, racking up individual victories like collectible trophies. She took a sip of her beer and tilted her head thoughtfully. "This year, or just this planet?" Every conversation in the cantina stopped. The War-Thane's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Krillian expression that usually indicated confusion or surprise. Excuse me? "My kill count," Lexa clarified, setting down her drink and giving him her full attention. "Are you asking about this year's numbers, or just what I've logged since we deployed to Zephyr 3? Because those are pretty different totals." Grakus's mandibles clicked uncertainly. Around the cantina, other patrons were leaning forward, suddenly very interested in the conversation. A hegemony trade representative dropped his fork. 2 Altarian smugglers stopped mid-gesture in what had been an animated discussion about shipping routes. You track your kills by time period?" the War-Thane asked slowly. "Well, yeah," Lexa shrugged. "How else would you do performance evaluations? Command needs quarterly reports, and my squad leader likes to see monthly breakdowns for efficiency metrics. Plus, there's the annual review process. You can't get promoted without proper documentation." The silence stretched longer. Somewhere in the back of the cantina, someone's drink hit the floor. "Perhaps," Grakus said carefully, "you could elaborate on these numbers?" Lexa glanced around the room, noting the mix of civilian and military faces, all staring at her with varying degrees of fascination and horror. Most of these people had probably never seen serious combat. They wouldn't understand the context. "Okay. So this year I'm sitting at about 41,000 confirmed kills," she began, pulling up her personal service record on the datapad. "Though that's probably low. We've been doing a lot of night operations lately, and BDA is always incomplete in low-visibility scenarios." A Centurion trader made a choking sound. 41,000? Grakus repeated slowly. 41,216 to be precise. At least, that's what made it into the official count. Lexa scrolled through her records, warming to the subject. "See, the thing is, when you're doing area denial operations or mass formation disruption, individual kill attribution gets really complicated. Like, If I drop a thermobaric charge into a bunker complex, do I get credit for each individual hostile eliminated, or just the primary target? The Geneva Conventions are pretty clear about civilian casualties, but the engagement rules get fuzzy when you're dealing with military infrastructure. The War-Thane was staring at her like she'd just announced she could breathe vacuum. And that's just this year, Lexa continued conversationally. Planet-side totals are different because we only deployed here 8 days ago, so for Zephyr 3 specifically, I'm only at about 3,000 confirmed. Maybe 3,500 if you count the probable kills from the industrial sector sweep yesterday. An Altarian pilot stood up from his table and walked out of the cantina without saying a word. 3,000 in 8 days? Grakus managed. Well, it's been a target-rich environment, Lexa explained. The local infestation was pretty well established, and they'd built up quite a network before we arrived. My squad's been pulling double shifts just to stay on schedule. Jenkins actually bagged over 4,000 yesterday alone, but he had the good sector assignments. She paused, noticing the way everyone was staring at her. Look, I know those aren't impressive numbers compared to some of the veterans. Sergeant Martinez hit 200,000 last quarter. But she's been in the service for 6 years and gets all the prime deployment slots. I'm still pretty new at this. The hegemony trade representative had gone very pale, which was impressive considering his species' naturally gray complexion. New? Grakus whispered. Yeah, I've only been active for 14 months. Still learning the ropes, you know. My training scores were decent, but real-world operations are totally different from the simulations. Lexa took another sip of beer. Actually, speaking of training, want to see something funny? I still have my academy records on here somewhere. She started scrolling through her datapad, hunting for the files. See, the thing about human military training is that they really emphasize thoroughness. Can't graduate until you hit minimum proficiency standards across all combat scenarios. And the instructors are absolutely obsessive about documentation. Every single training exercise gets logged and analyzed. The cantina had gone so quiet that the only sound was the hum of the air recycling system. Ah, here we go. Lexa turned the datapad around so Grakus could see the screen. Basic infantry school graduation requirements. Had to maintain a minimum elimination rate of 800 targets per hour across sustained combat scenarios. The final exam was a 72-hour field exercise where we had to clear an entire simulated urban environment. Grakus leaned forward to read the display, his 4 eyes moving independently as they tracked across the numbers. This says you eliminated 14,000 simulated enemies in 3 days. As a training exercise? Yeah, that was a rough week. Almost didn't make the cut. My efficiency dropped during the night fighting portions and I wasted way too much ammunition on the close quarters sections. Had to repeat the urban warfare module twice before I got it right. Lexa shook her head ruefully. Embarrassing, really. My marksmanship instructor said I was overthinking the target identification protocols. The War-Thane straightened slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. You said you were new at this? Right, 14 months active duty. Like I said, still learning. Lexa closed the academy files and returned to her equipment inventory. Actually, that reminds me. I should probably update my gear efficiency ratings. The new plasma rifle has been performing way better than the old model, and Command wants feedback on the upgraded targeting systems. She pulled up a fresh spreadsheet and began entering data with the methodical precision of someone who had filled out a lot of these forms. Let's see. Average engagement range, 200 meters, target acquisition time, 0.4 seconds, elimination rate per minute. She paused, stylus tapping against the screen as she ran the calculations. That's higher than I thought. Maybe I should double-check these numbers. Around the cantina, several patrons were quietly settling their tabs and heading for the exit. The thing is, Lexa continued, apparently oblivious to the exodus, human military doctrine really emphasizes accuracy and efficiency. There's no point in wasting ammunition or time on suboptimal engagement strategies. Every shot should eliminate a target. Every target should be eliminated with minimum resource expenditure. It's just basic cost-benefit analysis. War-Thane Grakus sat down heavily in the chair across from her, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. Human, he said quietly, what exactly do you consider normal for your species' military operations? Lexa looked up from her datapad, considering the question seriously. You want the real answer or the recruiting poster version? The real answer. Okay, well, she leaned back in her chair, beer in one hand and stylus in the other. The average human infantry soldier is expected to maintain a minimum combat effectiveness rating of about 2,000 eliminations per standard deployment cycle. That's just to stay qualified for active duty. If you want promotion opportunities or specialized training, you need to hit at least 5,000 per cycle with sustained performance metrics. She took another sip of beer. Of course, that's just for basic infantry. The special operations guys have much higher standards. I knew a guy in Special Forces who bragged about hitting 50,000 in a single deployment, but he was showing off. Most of the serious operators don't talk about their numbers. Operational security and all that. Grakus was staring at her with an expression that might have been existential dread. And this is normal? For humans? For military humans, yeah. Civilians obviously have different performance expectations. Lexa shrugged. Actually, that brings up an interesting point about the documentation requirements. She turned the datapad toward him again, pulling up a new set of files. See, the thing about human military record keeping is that everything has to be categorized properly. You can't just lump all your eliminations together. Command needs to know what kinds of targets you're engaging, what weapons you're using, environmental factors, collateral damage assessments, ammunition expenditure ratios. The spreadsheet that appeared on the screen had more columns than Grakus could count, flow-like. For this deployment, I've got my kills broken down by target type: hostile combatants, infrastructure targets, vehicle eliminations, area denial operations. Then there's weapon classification: small arms, explosives, indirect fire support, close air support assisted, and environmental categories: urban, rural, underground, zero atmosphere. The War-Thane was staring at the spreadsheet like it was a map to the afterlife. You have categories? Oh yeah, tons of them. Command is really big on data analysis. They use our performance metrics to optimize training programs, improve equipment design, refine tactical doctrine. Everything feeds back into the system. Lexa scrolled down through the spreadsheet, revealing row after row of meticulously categorized death. See, this section is just for the indirect kills. Targets eliminated through structural collapse, secondary explosions, environmental hazards. A small green notification light began blinking on her data pad. Lexa glanced at it and smiled. Oh, speak of the devil. Looks like the after-action report from yesterday's operation just came through. Want to see something really interesting? Before Grakus could answer, she had opened the new file and was scanning through it with professional interest. They're crediting me with an additional 412 eliminations from yesterday's industrial complex sweep. Apparently the delayed detonations brought down more of the structure than we initially assessed. She made a note in her personal log. That brings my Zephyr 3 total up to, 3,428 confirmed kills in 8 days. The cantina was now almost empty except for the bartender, who was pretending very hard to be invisible. Of course, Lexa added thoughtfully. That's still way below optimal efficiency. The terrain here isn't great for proper enfilade fire, and the local architecture doesn't channel explosive force very well. Plus, we're operating with reduced ammunition loadouts because of the supply chain issues. She looked up at the War-Thane with genuine curiosity. What kind of kill ratios do Krillian warriors usually maintain? 432 lifetime kills is... well, that's not bad for someone who doesn't have access to modern weapon systems, I guess. Grakus opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again without making any sound. From somewhere behind the bar, they could hear the sound of the bartender very quietly placing a call to the local authorities. The hegemony trade representative was the first to break. "That's impossible," he declared, his gray skin flushing darker with agitation. "The Galactic Intelligence Database tracks all major military actions. There's no way a single human could have eliminated 40,000 targets in one standard year without triggering automated conflict escalation protocols." Lexa looked up from her datapad, where she'd been double-checking the ammunition requisition forms for next week's operation. "You want to fact-check it? Go ahead. My service number is Lima Foxtrot 6649 Delta." The representative's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his own portable terminal and connected to the GID mainframe. Around the cantina, other patrons were doing the same thing, their various devices chirping and humming as they accessed the central intelligence network that tracked military activities across known space. War-Thane Grakus leaned forward, his 4 eyes fixed on the hegemony representative's screen. "Well, what does it say?" The representative stared at his display for a long moment, his breathing becoming increasingly rapid. This can't be right." "What?" Grakus demanded. "According to the database, human military forces have conducted, let me see." The representative's voice was getting higher. 834 separate pacification operations in the last 6 months alone, across 49 different star systems. An Altarian smuggler looked up from his own terminal. "That matches what I'm seeing, and it says here that the average casualty count per operation is..." He paused, reading the numbers twice. 15,000 hostiles eliminated. Lexa took a sip of her beer. "Sounds about right. Though those numbers are probably conservative. GID doesn't always get the final tallies from our after-action reports. There's usually a delay while the intelligence analysts verify the data." The cantina erupted in the sound of multiple beings frantically accessing databases, cross-referencing reports, and making increasingly distressed noises as they tried to process what they were reading. "Here," said a Centaurian trader, waving his tablet. "It says humans have been conducting routine security sweeps in the Outer Rim territories. But according to the casualty figures, each sweep eliminates more hostiles than the entire Third Hegemony War." "That's because the Third Hegemony War was between civilized species," Lexa explained patiently. "We negotiate, use diplomacy, try to minimize casualties. But when you're dealing with actual pests, aggressive expansionist species, pirate networks, slaver organizations, efficiency is more important than politics." War-Thane Grakus was reading over the representative's shoulder, his mandibles clicking in distress. "This says that in the Kepler 438 system alone, human forces eliminated over 2 million targets in a single month." "Yeah, that was a messy operation." Lexa pulled up her own records from that deployment. The local infestation had spread across 3 planets and 17 asteroid mining facilities. "We had to sterilize the entire system before they could metastasize to neighboring sectors. Took my unit about 6 weeks to complete the pacification." "6 weeks?" the hegemony representative repeated faintly. "You eliminated 2 million in 6 weeks." "Well, it wasn't just my unit. We had support from the 23rd Assault Division and 2 companies of heavy armor. Plus, orbital bombardment cleared out most of the infrastructure targets before we went in to mop up." Lexa shrugged. "Standard combined arms operation." An uncomfortable silence settled over the cantina as the implications sank in. These weren't special operations or elite units. This was routine military activity that humans considered so normal, they filed it under maintenance. The Altarian smuggler cleared his throat nervously. "The database says you're classified as entry-level infantry. What does that mean, exactly?" "It means I'm new," Lexa said. "I told you, 14 months active duty. I'm still learning the basics." "Basics?" Grakus's voice cracked slightly. "Yeah, you know, standard small unit tactics, equipment maintenance, proper documentation procedures, basic marksmanship." Lexa counted off on her fingers. "I'm hoping to qualify for advanced training soon, maybe get into specialized combat roles, but you need at least 2 years of general infantry experience before they'll consider you for the really serious positions." The War-Thane was staring at her like she'd just announced her intention to devour his planet. "What kind of serious positions?" "Oh, the usual. Special forces, orbital assault, deep reconnaissance, that sort of thing. The elite units that handle the really difficult operations." Lexa's eyes lit up with professional enthusiasm. "Actually, I put in an application for planetary pacification specialist training. That's where you get to work with the really advanced weapon systems." Around the cantina, several patrons were quietly hyperventilating. "Advanced weapon systems?" the hegemony representative managed. "Sure. Tectonic disruptors, atmospheric processors, stellar engineering equipment, all the tools you need for comprehensive threat elimination." Lexa took another drink. Course, you need to demonstrate exceptional performance metrics before they'll trust you with that kind of hardware. Most applicants need at least 100,000 confirmed kills and flawless documentation standards. The Centaurian trader made a noise like a deflating balloon. 100,000, Grakus repeated numbly. The minimum, Lexa confirmed. Competition is pretty fierce for the advanced programs. My training instructor said I'd need to hit at least 200,000 before my application would be seriously considered. That's why I'm working so hard to improve my efficiency ratings. She pulled up another set of files on her datapad, scrolling through performance metrics with the casual interest of someone reviewing sports statistics. See, the thing about human military career progression is that it's all based on objective performance data. You can't just rely on seniority or political connections. Command wants to see results. Quantifiable, verifiable, thoroughly documented results. The sound of frantic database searching had died down, replaced by the kind of stunned silence that usually followed major revelations about the fundamental nature of reality. Speaking of documentation, Lexa continued, apparently oblivious to the existential crisis she was causing, I should probably file the preliminary paperwork for next week's operation. We're scheduled for a routine pest control sweep in the Proxima Centauri system, and the logistics coordinators need advance notice for ammunition resupply. She opened a new form on her datapad and began filling in the required fields with practiced efficiency. Let's see. Estimated target population. Approximately 50,000 hostiles based on reconnaissance data. Projected ammunition expenditure. Standard loadout plus 20% contingency reserve. Environmental factors. Mixed urban and industrial terrain with moderate civilian population density. War-Thane Grakus watched her fill out the form with the kind of fascination usually reserved for witnessing natural disasters. Pest control, he asked weakly. Yeah, it's pretty routine stuff. Local pirate confederation got a little too aggressive in their expansion efforts, started interfering with legitimate commerce. Standard procedure is to eliminate the leadership structure, destroy their operational infrastructure, and neutralize any remaining resistance elements. Lexa paused in her typing to consider the tactical situation. Shouldn't take more than a few days, assuming the intelligence reports are accurate. The hegemony representative was reading something on his terminal that was making his complexion shift through several different shades of gray. The Proxima Centauri operation, he said slowly. According to the advanced notifications, humans have classified this as a minor police action. Right, because it is. We're not talking about a major threat here, just some pirates who got above themselves. It's the kind of operation they assign to junior units for training purposes. Lexa finished filling out the ammunition request and moved on to the next section. Actually, this'll be my first time as squad leader for an independent operation. Good chance to demonstrate leadership potential. Around the cantina, the remaining patrons were staring at their terminals with expressions ranging from disbelief to pure terror. The numbers they were reading didn't match anything in their understanding of military operations. What humans considered minor police actions involved casualty figures that would constitute existential threats to most galactic civilizations. The Altarian smuggler was the first to find his voice. Your species conducts these operations regularly? Oh, sure, all the time. Got to keep the shipping lanes clear, maintain stability in the colonial territories, prevent aggressive species from getting too ambitious? Lexa shrugged. It's just part of maintaining galactic order. Someone has to do the dirty work. That's when the cantina's communication systems started pinging. Emergency alerts began flooding in from across the local sector. Trade route disruptions, shipping delays, insurance premium adjustments, and urgent advisories about increased human military activity in the region. The background hum of routine commercial traffic was being replaced by the frantic chatter of merchants and traders trying to reroute around areas where humans were conducting routine maintenance. Human maintenance did. Lexa glanced up at the wall display where the alerts were scrolling past in multiple languages. Huh, she said mildly. Looks like word is getting out about next week's operation. The civilian traffic coordinators are already adjusting shipping schedules to avoid the affected systems. War-Thane Grakus stared at the stream of alerts with growing horror. AI evacuate entire star systems when you conduct operations? Well, not evacuate exactly. More like temporary relocation of non-essential personnel. Lexa finished her paperwork and closed the datapad. Standard safety protocol. Human military operations tend to involve a lot of collateral damage, and civilian insurance doesn't usually cover acts of war claims. Better to get the non-combatants out of the way before things get messy. The communication alerts were now coming in so fast that the text was almost unreadable. Across the galaxy, the mere announcement of a single human pest control operation was causing economic disruption on a scale that most species associated with major interstellar conflicts. From behind the bar, the sound of the bartender's emergency call to local authorities was getting increasingly frantic. "I don't care what the regulations say," the War-Thane bartender was hissing into his communicator. "There's a human military operative in my establishment discussing casualty figures that sound like genocide statistics. No, she's not threatening anyone. That's what makes it worse." The hegemony trade representative looked up from his terminal, his gray complexion now approaching translucent. "I've been cross-referencing the operational tempo data," he announced to the increasingly shell-shocked cantina. "According to these records, human military forces conduct an average of 46 major operations per standard month. That's more military activity than the entire Galactic Defense Coalition has seen in the past 5 years. "Makes sense," Lexa said, glancing at the wall chronometer. "We've got a lot of territory to cover and not enough personnel to handle everything simultaneously. That's why Command is always pushing for improved efficiency metrics and faster deployment cycles." An elderly Rigelian merchant who'd been quietly nursing his drink finally spoke up, his voice trembling. "Child, do you understand what you're describing? In my homeworld's entire recorded history, our military has never eliminated more than 300 enemies in a single conflict. You're talking about numbers that exceed our species' total wartime casualties across 8 centuries. Lexa considered this seriously. "Well, that makes sense. Your species evolved on a resource-rich world with minimal territorial conflicts, right? You never had to develop serious military doctrine because you didn't face existential threats." She pulled up a stellar cartography file on her datapad. "Humans evolved differently. We'd been dealing with constant threats since before we left our home system. Hostile environments, aggressive species, resource competition, territorial expansion pressures." She gestured at the star map showing human-controlled space. "By the time we reached the galactic community, we'd already developed military systems optimized for eliminating threats before they could become existential problems. It's just a different evolutionary approach to survival." The Centaurian trader was staring at his own display with mounting horror. "These efficiency reports," he said slowly, "they're comparing human military performance to industrial manufacturing metrics. Kill ratios per hour, ammunition cost per elimination, resource expenditure optimization." "Right, because that's how you maintain sustainable operations," Lexa explained. "If you're not tracking efficiency, you end up wasting resources on suboptimal engagement strategies. Command runs quarterly reviews to identify areas for improvement and implement best practices across all units." War-Thane Grakus was reading through a particularly detailed report, his forearms trembling slightly. "This says that human military doctrine classifies conflicts into 12 different threat categories, ranging from nuisance-level incidents to existential species threats. Where would my people's traditional combat fall on this scale?" Lexa scrolled through the classification system, studying the criteria. "Based on what you've described, individual combat, honor duels, clan warfare, you'd probably fall under Category 2, localized territorial disputes with minimal strategic impact." "Category 2, Grakus repeated faintly. "Yeah, it's the kind of situation where we might send a single squad to provide stability support if asked. Usually gets resolved with minimal resource expenditure." Lexa looked up from her datapad. "Actually, that reminds me. We did a Category 2 intervention in the Vegas system about 3 months ago. Local conflict between 2 species fighting over mineral rights. Took us about 6 hours to establish peace." The Altarian smuggler made a sound like he was choking. 6 hours to resolve an interspecies conflict? "Well, most of that was travel time and paperwork. The actual conflict resolution was pretty straightforward. We just eliminated the leadership elements from both factions and established a neutral administrative zone. Standard peacekeeping protocol. The emergency alerts on the wall display were now scrolling past so quickly they were creating a blur of red warning text. Insurance companies across the sector were frantically recalculating risk assessments, and trade guilds were issuing emergency advisories about elevated human military activity zones. "This is madness," the hegemony representative whispered, staring at the cascade of alerts. "Your species treats warfare like an industrial process." "Well, yeah," Lexa said, genuinely puzzled by his distress. "How else would you approach it? Emotion-based decision-making leads to inefficient resource allocation and unnecessary casualties. Better to use data-driven analysis and standardized procedures." The cantina's front entrance slid open with a hydraulic hiss, and 3 humans in combat fatigues walked in like they owned the place. "Vasquez," called the first one, a tall woman with sergeant's stripes and a rifle slung casually across her back. "There you are. Command moved up the departure time. We're wheels up in 30 minutes. Lexa looked up from her datapad, where she'd been reviewing the orbital bombardment coordinates for the Proxima Centauri operation. "Already? I thought we had until 800 tomorrow. Change of plans. Intelligence reports suggest the target population is larger than initially assessed," the sergeant replied, dropping into a chair at Lexa's table without invitation. "Looks like we're dealing with closer to 80,000 hostiles instead of 50. Command wants us to start the preliminary softening bombardment tonight." War-Thane Grakus, who had been staring at his drink for the past 10 minutes while processing everything he'd learned about human military efficiency, slowly turned to look at the newcomers. The 3 humans were armed and armored like they'd just stepped off a battlefield, but they were chatting about mass elimination scenarios with the casual tone most species reserved for discussing the weather. 80,000? Lexa frowned. "That's going to require a complete revision of the ammunition allocation. Did they update the supply manifest?" "Already handled," said the second human, a stocky man with corporal's insignia and what looked like dried blood on his boots. "Quartermaster bumped us up to full combat loadout, plus 50% contingency reserves. And they're attaching a heavy weapons squad for infrastructure demolition." The third human, younger than the others but sporting the kind of 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much combat, pulled out his own datapad and began reading from it. "Preliminary target analysis shows 17 major population centers, 43 industrial facilities, and approximately 230 fortified positions. Estimated completion time with current force allocation is 68 hours. Around the cantina, the few remaining patrons were listening to this conversation with expressions ranging from fascination to absolute terror. These humans were discussing the systematic elimination of 80,000 beings like it was a routine work assignment. 68 hours seems optimistic, the sergeant observed. "Remember the asteroid mining operation last month? Intelligence said 40,000 targets, turned out to be closer to 70. Took us an extra day just to clear the orbital platforms." "That was different," the corporal protested. "The mining platforms had better defensive systems than expected. These pirates are using mostly civilian infrastructure, minimal hardening, predictable defensive positions, standard commercial power grids we can disrupt." Lexa nodded thoughtfully. "Still, we should probably plan for at least 72 hours. Better to finish early and get some rest before the next deployment." The hegemony trade representative, who had been trying very hard to pretend he wasn't eavesdropping, finally couldn't contain himself. "Excuse me," he interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. "Did you just say you cleared 70,000 targets in how long?" The sergeant looked at him with mild interest. 4 days, including travel time." "Why 4 days?" the representative repeated faintly. "Well, 3.5 really. The last day was mostly just cleanup and documentation." The corporal shrugged. "Standard pacification timeline for that type of target environment." War-Thane Grakus found his voice. "How many humans were involved in this operation?" "Our squad plus 2 support elements," the young soldier answered. "So 15 personnel total, plus orbital fire support." The silence that followed this revelation was so complete that they could hear the bartender's panicked breathing from across the room. 15 humans, Grakus said slowly. Eliminated 70,000 enemies in 4 days. Give or take, the sergeant confirmed. Though to be fair, about 20,000 of those were infrastructure kills, power plant explosions, structural collapses, that sort of thing. Direct engagement numbers were probably closer to 50,000. The Centaurian trader made a noise like a dying engine. Speaking of numbers, the sergeant continued, turning back to Lexa, Command wants to talk to you about your performance metrics from the Kepler deployment. Apparently you're lagging behind the squadron average. Lexa's face fell. How far behind? About 12% below target for your experience level. Colonel Martinez wants to schedule a professional development review when we get back. The sergeant's expression was sympathetic, but firm. Look, I know you're trying, but these numbers matter for promotion consideration. You need to hit your quarterly minimums if you want to make corporal. I know, Lexa sighed heavily. It's just that the target identification protocols are so much more complex in real combat than they were in training. And I keep second-guessing myself on the explosive placement calculations. The corporal leaned forward encouragingly. Hey, don't beat yourself up about it. You've only been in the field for 14 months. It takes time to develop proper battlefield efficiency. Most of us didn't hit optimal kill ratios until our second year. Really? Lexa looked hopeful. Absolutely. I was terrible my first deployment. Barely managed 38,000 confirmed kills in 6 months. Command almost recycled me back to basic training. The young soldier nodded in agreement. Same here. Took me 18 months to break the 50,000 barrier. Now I'm hitting twice that on routine operations. Around the cantina, several patrons were quietly weeping. War-Thane Grakus stared at the three humans with the expression of someone watching his entire understanding of reality crumble in real time. You're saying that her performance is considered substandard? Not substandard, the sergeant corrected quickly. Just below optimal for her rank and experience level. Vasquez is still well within acceptable parameters for a junior enlisted soldier. She's just not hitting the marks she needs for accelerated promotion. What would she need to do to meet those marks? The hegemony representative asked in a voice barely above a whisper. The sergeant consulted her own datapad. For corporal, she needs to maintain a minimum elimination rate of 4,000 targets per standard month, with at least 60% direct engagement kills and documented proficiency in 3 different weapon systems. Plus, clean efficiency ratings and proper mission documentation. 4,000 per month? Grakus repeated numbly. That's just the minimum, the corporal added helpfully. For competitive promotion consideration, you really want to be hitting at least 6,000. The top performers in our unit are pulling down 8,000 to 10,000 per month. The young soldier was studying his own performance data. Actually, Vasquez isn't that far off the pace. If she improves her target acquisition time by about 15% and reduces ammunition waste by another 10%, she'd be competitive for advanced training programs. You think so? Lexa asked eagerly. Definitely. Your tactical planning scores are excellent, and your documentation is some of the best in the company. You just need to work on operational efficiency. That's when the cantina's door slid open again, and a human officer in pristine dress uniform walked in, with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the deadliest person in any room. Sergeant Chen, the officer called out. Status report. The sergeant immediately stood to attention. Sir, squad ready for deployment. All personnel accounted for, equipment checked, mission parameters reviewed. The officer, a lieutenant colonel according to his insignia, nodded approvingly. Then his gaze swept across the cantina, taking in the shell-shocked alien patrons and the atmosphere of barely controlled panic. I see we've had some cultural exchange, he observed dryly. Vasquez, please tell me you haven't been sharing classified operational data with civilian populations again. No, sir, Lexa replied quickly. Just general performance metrics and basic procedural information. The lieutenant colonel sighed. How many times do I have to remind you people that what we consider routine operational parameters tend to cause psychological trauma in non-human populations? He turned to address the cantina at large, his tone shifting to something that might have been apologetic. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings of various species, he began formally. I apologize for any confusion or distress caused by my personnel. Please understand that Corporal Vasquez was simply answering questions about standard human military procedures. No classified information has been disclosed, and no threats have been made. The War-Thane bartender emerged from behind the bar, his hands visibly shaking. Sir, with respect, your soldier has been discussing casualty figures that exceed most planetary conflicts. Our patrons are concerned about the implications. The lieutenant colonel nodded understandingly. I can appreciate that concern. However, I want to assure you that all human military operations are conducted in strict accordance with galactic law and established rules of engagement. We only target verified hostile forces and take extensive precautions to minimize civilian casualties. He paused, pulling out his own datapad and reviewing something on the screen. That said, I should probably mention that we'll be conducting a routine pest control operation in this sector over the next few days. Standard procedure requires me to file advance notice with local civilian authorities to prevent any misunderstandings about the increased military traffic. War-Thane Grakus looked up with the expression of someone who had just realized he was standing in the blast radius of an antimatter warhead. Routine pest control, he repeated mechanically. Yes, nothing too complex. Local pirate confederation has been interfering with commercial shipping. Standard elimination protocols followed by infrastructure cleanup and administrative reorganization. The lieutenant colonel's tone was so casual he might have been discussing filing quarterly tax reports. Should be wrapped up by the end of the week. The emergency alert system on the cantina's wall display was now scrolling warnings so fast that individual messages were becoming unreadable. Insurance companies were declaring force majeure clauses, trade routes were being rerouted across multiple sectors, and emergency evacuation advisories were being issued for civilian populations within a 50 light-year radius. The lieutenant colonel glanced at the display and nodded approvingly. Good to see the civilian coordination protocols are working efficiently. Always important to keep non-combatants clear of operational areas. He turned back to his soldiers. All right, people, time to move. Transport leaves in 20 minutes, and command wants us in system before the preliminary bombardment begins. As the humans filed toward the exit, Lexa paused and looked back at War-Thane Grakus with genuine concern. I hope I didn't upset you, she said. I know humans approach warfare differently than most species. We don't mean to be intimidating, it's just how we solve problems. Then she was gone, leaving behind a cantina full of beings who would never look at human military personnel the same way again. War-Thane Grakus was still processing the casual discussion of 70,000 eliminations in 4 days when his brain decided to ask the question that would shatter what remained of his worldview. Corporal Vasquez, he called out as she reached the cantina's exit. Those operations your squad mates mentioned, Kepler, the asteroid mining facility, those were actual combat deployments, correct? Lexa paused in the doorway, looking back with a puzzled expression. Combat deployments? Oh, no, those were training exercises. I haven't been assigned to a real operational unit yet. The silence that followed was so profound that it seemed to have physical weight. Training? The hegemony trade representative whispered. Exercises. Right, Lexa confirmed, stepping back into the cantina with the patient air of someone explaining something obvious to a confused child. I'm still in my initial qualification period. New personnel spend their first 18 months rotating through different training programs to develop baseline competencies before they're considered for operational assignments. She pulled out her datapad and scrolled to her service record. See, humans have pretty strict standards for military readiness. You can't just hand someone a weapon and call them a soldier. You need systematic skill development, comprehensive tactical training, and extensive practical experience before you're qualified for actual combat operations. War-Thane Grakus stared at her like she'd just announced that gravity was optional. Your training exercises, he said slowly, involve eliminating tens of thousands of targets? Well, yeah. How else would you verify combat effectiveness? Lexa looked genuinely confused by the question. The training scenarios are designed to replicate real operational conditions. If you can't handle simulated threats, you definitely can't handle actual ones. She scrolled through her training records, warming to the subject with professional enthusiasm. Basic infantry school graduation requirements include a minimum elimination rate of 1,200 targets per hour during sustained combat scenarios. The final examination is a 96-hour field exercise where candidates have to clear a simulated urban environment containing approximately 50,000 hostile targets. Around the cantina, several patrons were making noises that suggested their respiratory systems were no longer functioning properly. 50,000, Grakus repeated faintly, give or take. The exact number varies depending on the scenario configuration and environmental factors. Lexa shrugged. Most candidates complete the exercise in 70 to 80 hours, but you're allowed the full 96 if you need it. I finished in 73 hours, which was respectable but not exceptional. The Centaurian trader was gripping his table so hard that his knuckles had gone white. And this is normal? For human military training? For infantry training, yes. Other specialties have different requirements. Lexa consulted her datapad again. Combat engineers need to demonstrate proficiency in infrastructure demolition. They have to level a simulated city in under 12 hours using only standard equipment. Pilot candidates have to achieve specific kill ratios during air-to-ground training missions. Artillery specialists need to demonstrate precision bombardment capabilities. She trailed off, noticing the expressions of existential horror on every alien face in the cantina. Look, I know it sounds intense, but it's really just basic competency verification. The training scenarios are carefully designed to ensure graduates can handle standard operational requirements. The Altarian smuggler found his voice. What do you consider standard operational requirements? Oh, you know, target-rich environments, contested territory, hostile populations, limited logistical support. Lexa counted off on her fingers. The kind of situations where you need to eliminate threats quickly and efficiently without a lot of backup or resources. War-Thane Grakus was beginning to understand that his species' entire military tradition was roughly equivalent to human recreational activities. And after this training, you're considered qualified for actual combat? Basic combat, yes. Though, like I said, I'm hoping to qualify for advanced training programs. Special operations candidates have to demonstrate much higher performance standards. The lieutenant colonel, who had been waiting patiently by the door while his subordinate traumatized the local civilian population, cleared his throat. Vasquez, we really do need to leave. But since you've already started this conversation, why don't you show them your standard loadout? Might as well complete their education. Lexa brightened. Good idea, sir. I've been wanting to test the new plasma rifle's targeting system anyway. Before anyone could object, she began unpacking her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. The rifle that emerged from her pack looked less like a personal weapon and more like something designed to level city blocks. This is the standard issue M2847 plasma rifle, she announced, holding the weapon with casual familiarity. Effective range approximately 8 kilometers, rate of fire 600 rounds per minute, each round capable of penetrating 3 meters of reinforced steel. She pointed to various components as she spoke. Integrated targeting system with quantum processors for trajectory calculation, automatic friend or foe identification and predictive movement tracking. The power cell provides enough energy for approximately 4,000 shots at maximum setting. The hegemony representative was staring at the weapon like it was a religious artifact. That's artillery. You're describing artillery specification. Not really. Artillery is much more powerful. Lexa activated the weapon's display system, causing holographic targeting reticles to appear throughout the cantina. This is just personal defense equipment. Standard infantry loadout includes 6 of these rifles, plus backup weapons, explosives, and support gear. She gestured to her pack, which was apparently larger than it looked. I'm also carrying 40 plasma grenades, each with a blast radius of about 50 meters, plus a portable missile launcher with guided munitions, emergency demolition charges, and a quantum disruptor for hardened targets. War-Thane Grakus realized that a single human infantry soldier was carrying enough firepower to level his home city. This is what you consider basic equipment? For training purposes, yes. Operational loadouts include additional heavy weapons and specialized gear depending on mission parameters. Lexa began repacking her equipment with practiced efficiency. Actually, this is pretty light compared to what the advanced trainees carry. Special operations candidates get access to experimental weapons systems that I'm not even qualified to touch. The lieutenant colonel checked his chronometer and made an impatient noise. Vasquez, we're already behind schedule. Save the equipment demonstration for the transport. Yes, sir. Lexa slung her rifle and hefted her pack with ease that suggested the massive weight of military-grade ordnance was perfectly normal for her. Sorry about the delay, everyone. Hope this was educational. As the human squad filed out of the cantina, the lieutenant colonel paused at the door and addressed the shell-shocked alien patrons one final time. For what it's worth, he said with something that might have been sympathy, Corporal Vasquez really is one of our newer personnel. Her performance metrics are actually quite typical for someone at her experience level. You shouldn't assume that this represents the capabilities of our veteran units. The door slid shut behind him, leaving the cantina in absolute silence. After several minutes, the War-Thane bartender emerged from behind the bar and began quietly updating the establishment's policies on his personal data pad. He added new sections covering military personnel identification procedures, early warning systems for high casualty count discussions, and emergency evacuation protocols for human infantry demonstrations. Under the special circumstances heading, he added a note that human military personnel would henceforth be served drinks on the house, provided with premium seating, and generally treated with the kind of respect normally reserved for unstable nuclear ordnance. The hegemony trade representative was staring at his drink with the expression of someone reconsidering every life choice that had led him to this moment. The Centaurian trader was frantically updating his shipping insurance policies to include proximity to human training operations as a force majeure event. The Altarian smuggler was deleting all his contacts in sectors where humans conducted routine patrols. After a long while, War-Thane Grakus finally spoke, his voice carrying across the stunned silence with the weight of absolute certainty. We were wrong about Earth. Around the cantina, heads nodded in solemn agreement. They had spent their entire lives believing that military prowess was measured in individual combat achievements, personal honor, and small-scale conflicts between civilized species. Instead, they had discovered that humans treated warfare like an industrial science, with performance metrics that turned mass elimination into routine job requirements and training programs that prepared soldiers for scenarios that would constitute existential threats to most galactic civilizations. The bartender finished updating his policies and looked around at his traumatized customers. "Last call," he announced quietly, "and may whatever gods watch over us all have mercy on anyone stupid enough to threaten humanity." Outside, the sound of human transport ships departing for their next routine pest control operation rumbled through the night sky like distant thunder, carrying with it the promise that somewhere in the galaxy, someone was about to learn firsthand why humans considered their current casualty figures disappointingly low. As the rumble faded, the cantina's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. The wall display activated, showing an official seal from the Galactic Trade Commission. "Attention all commercial vessels and civilian installations," the announcement began in multiple languages. "Due to increased human military activity in sectors 23 through 31, all non-essential traffic is advised to avoid the designated areas for the next 72 hours. This is a standard precautionary measure and should not be interpreted as an emergency evacuation order." The message paused, then continued with what sounded like practiced bureaucratic resignation. "Please note that insurance claims related to proximity to human military operations will be processed under Code 7 regulations. Filing deadlines have been extended due to anticipated volume. Counseling services for species experiencing first contact with human military doctrine are available through the Galactic Mental Health Consortium." War-Thane Grakus stared at the display. "They have standardized procedures for psychological trauma caused by learning about human military capabilities?" The bartender nodded grimly. "Started about 2 years ago, after the incident in the Rigel sector. Apparently, when the Hegemony Council first received detailed reports about human police actions, 3 members had complete nervous breakdowns, and another one retired to become a monk." The Centaurian trader looked up from his frantically updated shipping manifests. "The scary part isn't even the numbers," he said quietly. "It's how reasonable they make it all sound. Like systematic elimination of 80,000 enemies is just..." "Tuesday," Because for them it is, the Altarian smuggler replied, his voice hollow. They've industrialized warfare to the point where what we consider apocalyptic scenarios are routine maintenance tasks. The hegemony representative was still staring at the space where Lexa had demonstrated her basic plasma rifle. Did you notice how she mentioned special operations candidates get experimental weapons? She's not qualified to touch. What could possibly be more dangerous than what we just saw? No one wanted to answer that question. The bartender sealed his updated policy files and looked around at his customers. You know what the real revelation is here? She wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. She was genuinely worried about her job performance. Around the cantina, heads nodded in stunned understanding. They had witnessed a human expressing professional anxiety about being 12% below optimal efficiency in activities that would qualify as war crimes against reality itself.